2:30 a.m. at the Rusty Anchor felt like a held breath. Chairs scraped in short bursts, and the old wood carried a salt smell that mixed with stale smoke. The light ran low and amber, soft enough to hide faces, but bright enough to show hands. While fans clicked lazily overhead and the ice machine hummed softly, Captain Emily Carter stood behind the bar and watched the door like a metronome. She worked under a borrowed name, a CID special agent from the United States Army, layered into a joint task force. A group of United States Marine Corps personnel pushed in, and their pre-incident indicators spoke louder than their laughter. Posture squared. Weight on the balls of the feet. Scan patterns neat and repeating. One checked reflections in a beer sign, while another sat with a clear view of the door and the rear exit. Emily felt the room narrow, while her Glock 19 rested, concealed in an inside waistband holster. Magazine seated and press-checked before the shift. And she kept it holstered in the crowd. Staff Sergeant Mason Cole closed the distance and clamped a hand around her wrist. Her breath stayed even as she read the space, counting steps to the back door and noting a bar towel and a heavy rocks glass as options for improvised control. The voices fell to a hush that felt louder than noise. And Emily knew this was not a bar brawl, but a coordinated arrest in motion. 2:30 a.m. settled over the Rusty Anchor like a slow tide. The air carried salt from the harbor, a thread of old smoke, and the sweet scrape of chair legs over wood, worn thin by years of stories. The light sat low and amber, rounding edges and turning every bottle into a sleepy lantern. The air conditioner whispered in a steady line, while the ice machine knocked every few beats like a quiet metronome. Captain Emily Carter moved in small circles behind the bar, cloth in hand, mind awake. She wore a name that was not hers. A CID special agent from the United States Army folded into a joint task force built for patience. Colonel Laura Bennett ran the task force and kept the lanes clean. Coordination with Naval Criminal Investigative Service, military police, and San Diego Police Department waited in the dark outside, aligned to the rules that come with off-base streets. Emily built the room in layers and watched for the first crease. Posture first, then breathing, then hands that either rest easy or hover like they have somewhere else to be. She tracked shoe patterns around the floor, the shine of rubber across old grain, and the way customers marked territory with a foot on a rung. Scan patterns told their own truth. Whether a head drifted or cut a tight path across doorways and exits, her Glock 19 stayed quiet under her shirt in an inside waistband holster. The magazine was seated. The press check had been done before the shift, and 2 spare magazines rode where a bartender would never reach unless she had to. Improvised options lived in plain sight. A bar towel could blind or bind for a second, and a heavy rocks glass could set space without breaking a body. Emily rinsed and stacked and listened to the room tell time. She kept her elbows in, shoulders low, and let each breath drop her heart rate one step closer to level. The door cracked open and the air changed by half a degree. The smell of outside pushed in with a snap of cool night and the faint petroleum of a working pier. A group of United States Marine Corps personnel entered with easy noise and heavy boots. Staff Sergeant Mason Cole led the way with a sway that looked like beer but moved like drill. Emily watched for alignment and found too much of it. Their laughter ran a little late. Their steps settled almost together, and the chairs shifted across the floor in near unison. One Marine checked his reflection in a beer sign without looking at himself. Another took a seat with his back near a wall so he could hold a clean angle on the door and the rear exit. Breathing patterns told the next piece. Chests rose shallow, and even as if a metronome had set the pace, not the random pull of a late-night crowd. Hands said even more. Fingers sat loose but close to hips and pockets. Never drifting. Never fidgeting the way a bored customer does when time goes slow. Weight distribution drew the clearest line. More than one heel lifted without thought and stayed light while the balls of the feet dug in, as if the floor might tilt. Emily reached for a rack of glasses and set it down one notch out of the center line. She rolled her shoulders and let the movement cover a new angle that gave her sight on the front door and the bathroom hall. Her mind logged pre-incident indicators, the way a clerk logs inventory. Rhythm shift. Synchronized posture. Eyes that work jobs, while the mouths pretend to play. The room did not know yet, but it could feel the answer forming. Sea air pressed through the vents, and the old wood seemed to hold its breath. Emily kept the bartender pattern alive, because pattern is its own kind of cover. A wipe, a rinse, a stack, and a slow turn that made it look like she was chasing a drip down the bar. Her Glock 19 stayed holstered because the crowd mattered more than her comfort. The safest move was the quiet one. And the quiet one lived in planning. Not in flashing steel. 2 spare magazines rested where her hand could find them without looking. The weight was familiar and invisible at the same time. Like a habit too old to notice. She marked the towel at her left and the heavy glass by the rail as the first tools in reach. Neither would draw eyes. Both could make space if space suddenly mattered. Mason Cole let his shoulders roll and drifted toward the counter with a loose smile that never touched his gaze. The others spread just enough to frame the room while not appearing to move at all. The rusty anchor felt smaller by the inch. Sound turned into cotton, and the chairs stopped scraping as if the building had paused to listen. Emily counted steps to the rear door and checked the line of travel past the ice bin. She thought about who would cut left and who would block, and how a single shift of a foot might change the whole board. The clock in her head tapped 2:30 a.m. again. She saw a line from the entry to the vanishing point of the hallway and understood where the next beat would land. This was not a night of spilled drinks and loud apologies. This was the first breath before a controlled takedown. Written in the way a room learns to hold still. 2:30 a.m. held tight inside the rusty anchor when Staff Sergeant Mason Cole clamped down on her wrist. Captain Emily Carter let breath lead and turned her hand toward the thumb, rolling the joint clean to break the grip. She followed with a precise strike along the median nerve, forcing his fingers to slacken while she shifted him off balance. Momentum carried him a step wide, and she steered that weight with a tight pivot. Another Marine surged in with a heavy swing, and Emily lifted a serving tray like an impact shield. Taking the shock along her forearm, she answered with a quick shot into the trapezius notch and watched his knees dip as control returned to the space. Arms locked around her ribs from behind and lifted for a crush. Emily planted, gave a controlled headbutt to stun without damage, then turned her hips to slip the body lock. An elbow found the solar plexus to empty his breath and buy a lane back to the bar rail. Her Glock 19 stayed holstered because crowded rooms demand restraint and positive identification. The magazine had been seated and press-checked before the shift, and it would remain quiet unless the mission required lethal force. She kept her centerline protected while her eyes measured exits, angles, and the hands that mattered most. Mason drew a folding tactical knife and advanced with short, testing steps. Emily palmed a bottle, broke the neck against the rail with a clean snap, and held the jagged glass low to manage distance without escalating to a firearm. The blade's arc met empty air as she edged him into a corner built of stool legs and cold steel. The room shifted from noise to thick silence as patrons were nudged away from the line of travel. Staff followed training and cleared the near tables while Emily tracked footwork, shoulder cues, and any sign of a second weapon. She kept improvised tools within reach and never lost the hallway or the back door from her peripheral map. Then the plan arrived all at once. Military police, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and San Diego Police Department pushed through the entrance with clear lanes and practice spacing. First Lieutenant Adrian Morales took the point. The arrest team flowed to their marks, and the bar froze as her true rank landed with the unit that knew exactly who had held the line. Control settled over the rusty anchor in measured waves. Patrons were guided to the walls while tables near the bar were cleared for a safe lane. San Diego Police Department assumed the lead as required off base. Naval Criminal Investigative Service and military police formed supporting elements to hold the perimeter and manage safety. Officers separated witnesses with calm hands and steady voices. Evidence technicians photographed fresh bruising and small cuts, then bagged the folding knife with a clean chain of custody. Flex cuffs clicked on wrists where needed and were checked for circulation. First Lieutenant Adrian Morales moved the military police team with short commands and clean spacing. He set a near-side perimeter and a far-side catch point to prevent leakage. Radio deconfliction kept blue on blue, risk near zero, as units called positions before they moved. Captain Emily Carter kept her cover posture until the last threat cue dropped. She assessed a shallow cut from glass, pressed a sterile pad from a pocket kit, and held pressure until the bleeding slowed. Her side ached with each breath, but her head stayed clear. She confirmed that her Glock 19 remained holstered and safe, then handed off a quick statement to the San Diego Police Department lead. Transport moved key individuals to a secure facility for interviews. The bar returned to dull light and low noise, while the joint team shifted to paperwork and logs. At the facility, a medic irrigated the cut and laid a neat line of sterile strips. Emily took water, reset her breathing, and prepared for the briefing that followed. Staff Sergeant Mason Cole sat apart with posture straight and eyes down. His service record read clean across deployments and schools, while several peers showed unexplained deposits that did not match pay records. The pattern suggested manipulation through a false counterintelligence narrative. Mason admitted to being told that an internal sweep was underway and that a bartender was a flagged contact, which fit the tactic of using good Marines as cover for a corrupt flow. Two separate intelligence packets pointed to Colonel Thomas Whitaker from Special Programs Procurement. His name appeared in vendor traffic and in a routing anomaly tied to diverted parts, which elevated the case from street level to policy level. The Joint Task Force weighed options with mission and public safety in mind. The goal remained to dismantle the network with minimal harm and clear authority. Colonel Laura Bennett made the hard call with the team aligned on safeguards. Mason would cooperate under strict supervision, wear a GPS ankle monitor, carry no weapon, and act only as a guide to procedures and drop patterns. Military police would escort him to every meeting point and keep him outside decision space. Naval Criminal Investigative Service would monitor the maritime side, while San Diego Police Department retained lead for any arrest off base. Emily did not like the risk but accepted the order because the law came first. She logged the conditions, repeated the communication plan, and confirmed the deconfliction matrix with every agency present. The room eased as roles locked into place. What began as a bar confrontation had redrawn into a structured path forward with clear lanes and a clearer target. The briefing room felt like a clean box built for focus. Maps covered the walls, and a table carried printouts that smelled like fresh toner. The air held the quiet of people who knew that patience saves lives. Captain Emily Carter stood near a harbor chart and traced the piers with her eyes. She was Criminal Investigation Division from the United States Army, seconded to a joint task force that had learned to move as one. Staff Sergeant Mason Cole waited a step back, with posture straight and hands still. Commercial satellite shots lay beside a detailed plan of the container yard. Drop points were circled in red, and small arrows showed the typical flow from road to pier. A second sheet listed code phrases that buyers used to mark time and confirm the handoff. San Diego Police Department would take the lead for all action off base. Naval Criminal Investigative Service covered the maritime angle and handled links to Marine units. Military police held the perimeter, managed transport, and kept the lanes clear for the arrest team. Deconfliction got the longest look. Call signs were assigned for every element, and a radio check schedule was printed in bold. Safe lanes were drawn so that no friendly team would cut in front of another without a call. Emily ran a personal inspection of her gear with quiet hands. Her Glock 19 sat in an inside waistband holster, with the right level of retention for concealed carry. She inserted a magazine, gave it a firm tap, and performed a press check to confirm status without drama. 2 spare magazines waited in a pouch that sat flat under a loose shirt. Her weapon light remained off because room light was sufficient, and she wanted no white splash in a hallway. She tested her radio battery, confirmed a backup, and slid an individual first aid kit into place with a tourniquet on top. Rules of engagement were read in plain words and nodded through. Semi-automatic fire only after positive identification was the standard in a civil environment. No blind fire. No warning shots. And every round accounted for in a safe direction. They built the approach like a carpenter builds a frame. Overwatch would hide high enough to see the white van and the pier mouth without exposing themselves. 2 cover teams would form an L that protected crossing movement and prevented crossfire. The arrest team laid out flex cuffs, evidence bags, and body cameras. They rehearsed who would talk, who would grab, and who would document. Every hand knew its job before they touched a door. Conditions for Mason sat on a single page with large checkboxes. He would wear a GPS ankle monitor, carry no weapon, and hold no authority despite his rank as staff sergeant. His role was to walk the path, describe the routine, and help identify buyers without setting a single condition. Emily and Mason walked the map together and found a rhythm that felt almost like trust. He tapped a line that skirted a stack of containers and said nothing, letting his finger speak for the habit of past runs. She nodded and wrote down a short note that marked a choke point near the loading cranes. Colonel Laura Bennett watched the room without raising her voice. The mission was simple as a sentence and hard as a night shift. Take down the network, protect the public, and keep the force within the law. Time spent now would buy calm later. The team practiced radio brevity that would keep the net clear once motion started. Every move had a name and every name had a fallback. Emily marked no shoot lanes on the harbor map and circled the blind side of a warehouse that threw bad light. She traced a clean approach along container row 3 Bravo to 3 Echo and added a small arrow for the final turn toward the pier. Her pencil stopped and she held a quiet promise that this would end with handcuffs and names. The room exhaled as the plan clicked into place. People filed tasks, checked batteries, and sealed evidence kits that would travel empty to the site and return full. The work felt steady, which is the only way a good plan should feel. Mason sat again and folded his hands where everyone could see them. He accepted the rules without pushback and waited for the next instruction. The shift from doubt to function was not warm, but it was real. Emily closed her notebook and looked at the clock on the far wall. 2 numbers met and held like a small drumbeat. She was ready for the night to trade paper for pavement. They left the room with a shared cadence. San Diego Police Department held the lead. Naval Criminal Investigative Service guarded the water. Military police guarded the edges. And the arrest team prepared to move. The plan carried them into the dark with a promise to bring everyone back. Cloud laid low over the harbor and turned the night into a muted dome. Sodium lamps painted the water in soft gold and set a dull shine along the ribs of stacked containers. The air smelled like brine and diesel. The Joint Task Force moved on quiet feet. Radio checks rolled in as low confirmations, each element calling ready and receiving a calm green. The net stayed clean and brief. Overwatch took their hide with a view of the white van and the mouth of the pier. Their sightlines overlapped just enough to prevent gaps without stacking fields of fire. They marked movement but held their shots. 2 cover teams shaped an L along the container rows. Each team controlled a lane that protected the other from crossfire and gave room to peel if contact pushed them backward. Every step was paced by breath. The arrest team waited behind a curtain of steel and shadow. Flex cuffs and evidence bags sat in a top layer for fast hands. Body cameras blinked, idle and ready. Captain Emily Carter walked offset behind Staff Sergeant Mason Cole. He wore street clothes and the small weight of a GPS monitor at his ankle. His hands stayed visible and empty. Mason did not carry a weapon under the terms of cooperation. His role was to draw a line through the maze and provide call-outs in plain language. Emily kept him within her peripheral while guarding angles. They moved past a forklift and a stack of pallets that smelled like rain. The wind shifted and threw voices down the aisle in thin strands. Somewhere, a gull barked at the dark. Overwatch called, a soft alert, that 3 men stood near the van. One of them favored his left leg and kept scanning the long axis of the yard. Another turned his head toward the pier like a metronome. Emily signaled a slow hold and sank behind a rust strip on the container wall. She watched the rhythm of the target group settle into a loop. The loop told her where the next step would land. Colonel Thomas Whitaker turned into the light and gave them a full profile. Overwatch confirmed identification with steady tone. The plan shifted from watch to wait for the right beat. Mason's face changed as one of the men looked hard and reached for recognition. The shape of the moment cracked like thin glass. A shout ripped the quiet and snapped the scene into motion. Rifle fire started in short, semi-automatic bursts from the far corner of the van. Emily drove to cover and felt rounds ping metal where her shoulder had been. She checked her breathing and kept her head low. She worked from behind hardened steel and built a clean sight picture. Positive identification came first. Then a controlled pair that carried her front sight back to center. She moved her shoulders to break the pattern and denied the shooter a repeat. Clock directions solved the talking problem. She sent a call that placed 2 shooters at 2 o'clock and 30 yards. Tucked behind pallets. The distance estimate gave cover teams the correction they needed. Naval Criminal Investigative Service tightened the left flank and called position before they slid. Military police pinned the opposite side with a steady lean and held a channel for the arrest team. San Diego Police Department locked the road exit with calm engines and clear lights. The net stayed disciplined. Every move came with a call sign and a position, and no one pushed into a lane without announcing it. Blue on blue, risk stayed near 0. Emily listened for reload. Pauses like a second language. The rhythm broke for a heartbeat, and she used it to shift one container down and cut the angle. Her feet stayed quiet and her muzzle stayed low until the shot was honest. One shooter overexposed, and she pressed a precise round into the edge of his cover to force him back. Another tried to flank along a shadowed aisle, only to meet a firm command from the far cover team. The arrest stack flexed and held. Mason kept a knee down and reported what his eyes could see. He named pallets, drums, and a dented forklift as reference points. His voice stayed even and he did not leave his lane. The white van jerked into motion and then stalled as a tire scrubbed a curb. Whitaker broke away from the driver's door and sprinted along the pier. Overwatch tracked him to a small boat that already shook with an idling engine. Emily felt the shot line form and let it fall away. The angle risked the operator and the hard surface beyond the boat. Rules mattered more than speed. Mason called runner on the pier with clothing details that matched the briefing photos. Emily took the cue and drove her legs hard down the boards. The pier slapped underfoot and sent up the smell of wet rope. She kept the muzzle down and used her offhand to guide momentum around a leaning bollard. The boat rocked as Whitaker jumped aboard and shoved at the throttle. Sound hit a higher note as the prop bit water. Cover teams held their lanes and kept the yard stable. Naval Criminal Investigative Service swept the pier approach to clear bystanders and secure the vessel line. Military police stayed wide to intercept any late escape. Overwatch gave a last clean call that Emily had the runner in reach. She closed the gap and felt the boards give a little under her last step. The shape of the boat rose under her as she pushed off. The night opened for a breath as she left the pier. Then the stern rushed up and took her weight with a short skid and a grunt. She landed square and drove her center low to stay on deck. Wind cut her face and the engine trembled through her knees. The harbor lights blurred and then steadied as she settled. The cabin door stood ahead like a dark square. She glanced once to confirm the yard was stable and the team had the lines. Radio sounded calm even with adrenaline in the edges. The next move was hers, and it was already chosen. Emily stepped for the cabin with both hands ready to control, rather than break. The chase had ended where it needed to end. The fight that mattered would be inside. The cabin closed in like a box, and the engine shook the floor. Colonel Thomas Whitaker slammed her into the console, and the torn stitches along her side lit up with heat. Captain Emily Carter let the pain pass and set her feet wide to keep from sliding. She pulled air deep, lowered her shoulders, and went to wrist control with both hands. The grip turned into leverage as she rotated his hand and drove his elbow across a tight arc. His balance broke, and his hips floated just enough to move him. She stepped through and set a rear armbar with his shoulder pinned toward the bench. Pressure went through the joint, not the airway, because she avoided any dangerous choke. The wheel and throttle stayed clear, so the boat remained steerable if the operator needed control. He thrashed as the hull slapped a small wave. Emily kept her center low and placed a knee beside his ribs instead of on them, using the deck like a brace. She held space from the dashboard to prevent a head strike and kept her own head off hard edges. Her left hand stayed on control while her right found the individual first aid kit pouch. Fingers closed on flex cuffs and pulled a strip free without looking down. She rolled his wrists behind the back of the bench and set the cuffs with even tension. Then checked circulation with a fast look at skin color and finger squeeze. She spoke a basic arrest notice that matched training and kept it brief. Miranda warning would be handled by San Diego Police Department after transfer and documentation. Her voice stayed even so the rest of the deck team could hear status over engine noise. Naval Criminal Investigative Service climbed aboard with clean spacing and cleared the cabin corners. Military police followed, logged the time, and photographed injuries and existing marks for later comparison. A small bag caught a phone and a set of keys, while a technician built the chain of custody with names and badge numbers. Emily confirmed that her Glock 19 had never left the inside waistband holster and that her magazines were accounted for. She passed a short update over the radio and waited for the reply that the pier was secure. The boat settled into idle and the air lost a layer of diesel bite. She let her breathing reset until the ache in her side faded from sharp to dull. The cabin felt larger, with other hands doing their work and a steady pen scratching on a form. She looked past the doorway to the dark water and allowed a quiet second of relief before turning back to the job. Dawn eased over the docks and turned steel edges soft. Captain Emily Carter stood on the pier and transferred custody of Colonel Thomas Whitaker. Wrists secured with flex cuffs, to the security detail that logged every step. Names, times, and condition went on the form in steady handwriting that did not rush. Colonel Laura Bennett gave the update in a calm voice that matched the water. Every team from the night had hit on time, and the network had come down, link by link. Relief moved through the group like a small tide that did not need to shout. San Diego Police Department took the lead for the off-base investigation as planned. Naval Criminal Investigative Service finalized maritime notes and coordinated with port authorities. Military police finished perimeter logs, photographed remaining marks, and collected items into sealed evidence bags with clean chain of custody. Emily confirmed that her side was dressed and stable, then signed where her name belonged. She saw the boat secured, the pier rechecked, and the last cones pulled back from the access road. The sound of engines faded to a low murmur that felt like the city waking up. Mason Cole stood a few paces away, with his posture set straight. He met her eyes and gave a small nod that carried respect without asking for anything. Emily answered with a quiet nod of her own, an acknowledgement of cooperation that stayed inside the rules. The light climbed the stacks of containers and caught on wet rope and steel. The dock smelled like salt and diesel, but the tension had washed out with the tide. Sometimes a win looks like paperwork and quiet radios and a pair of flex cuffs that close without drama. Emily took in the scene and felt the weight leave her shoulders one notch at a time. The goal had never been noise, only safety and truth inside the law. Morning settled around the harbor and left a clear path forward for everyone who had done the work. 2 weeks later, the hall smelled of polished wood and quiet pride. Captain Emily Carter of the Criminal Investigation Division, United States Army, stood at attention in a uniform, pressed to a clean edge. Major General Diane Haverford pinned the Army Commendation Medal without the V device as restrained applause rose. Emily heard claps fade and thought about rules honored in the dark, where courage had been discipline, checklists, and patience to choose the safer path. Recognition belonged to responsibility, not a spotlight. She returned the salute, breathed evenly, and carried certainty that victories live in choices no one sees. Outside the facility, Captain Emily Carter of the Criminal Investigation Division, United States Army, closes the file and watches a gentle morning settle. Real courage lives in choices no one sees, steady and quiet. If this speaks to you, share it and follow for more stories of integrity and hope.